I want to thank the 3 people who said good morning back. That is what is going to keep me out of therapy today. Thank you. We're going to try it one more time, though. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. My name's Carl Guardino, and I have the honor of serving our state as a member of our California Transportation Commission, and are delighted that so many people are in the room for day 2 of our inaugural Active Transportation Program Symposium. I'm hoping you can join me in once again thanking the 3 folks who are really the tips of the spear in doing all the work to make this worthy of each of our time. And I'm going to ask them to just stand for a moment and stay standing. Emily, yesterday you were hiding behind a post. Are you in the room? There you are, with Caltrans. Lori Waters, would you mind standing as well? And Anya Allenbacher, are you in the room? Anya? She can hear your love from outside. And it reminds me to remind each of us, because it's sometimes easy to forget that folks are participating fully but remotely. Not everyone could afford the time away from work or the travel expenses, and we want to be inclusive as a culture and as a commission and as California. We had more than 80 people logged in all day yesterday, and we hope similar today. And that's why it's so important that we do make that access fully available through that Slido app. So we would remind everyone participating via webcast, as well as everyone in this room. If you want to weigh in with your comments and your questions on Slido, there is in your packet the information on how you do that, because for each session and each speaker, there is a different Slido code that you have to log out of the past one and log back into the next one. And if you have any questions on that, please grab a member of our CTC team. They can also help by walking you through that information. But let's be inclusive and make sure we include all those 80 folks who are joining us remotely. The second item I wanted to make sure we cover under housekeeping, if you open up your packets, if you still have those, please do. In the left sleeve, in the very back, is our way to continue to add value to you, as we are hoping to make this not solely the inaugural symposium, but a symposium that we will continue to do in years to come. The best way we improve is by your constructive feedback. There's a hard copy of a post-event survey for your consideration that you can turn in to me at the end or any member of our team, or you can do this online as well on the Symposium website. Any questions about using the Slido app or the event survey before we move on? We have time in case I didn't explain either of those adequately for you. Okay? And if people have questions that are joining us by webcast, send them in by Slido, and we'll make sure to answer those questions on either as well. Okay. I'm going to stand away from the mic, so I'll grab a mic here if that's okay with our CTC staff for a couple more moments before we introduce our morning keynote speaker. At my day job at the Silicon Valley. What's that? Thank you. Ooh. I don't need to stand that close. At my day job at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, we have 3 practices that we try to live by as professionals honoring people throughout our community. We don't always succeed because we're human beings, subject to failure, but this is what we try. And so this is the audience participation portion of our program. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up. And you may want to set down your coffee or hot tea. So the first thing we do is that we try to set stretch goals that are aspirational and ambitious. So we are first this morning going to stretch high because that's what we do. For the ambition amongst us, I even go up on my toes when I do this to get that extra stretch. So just stretch this morning. Great. Now we're going to do this part very carefully so as not to poke out the eyes of the person next to you or to trigger a workers' comp claim. But we at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group also try to build bridges, not burn them down. Do this carefully by reaching across to others to build bridges. Right? Good, good. Now this one is especially, please be careful, because older people like me, please respect your elders. I have to prevent my back going out when I do this. But when we're trying to do the important work we're doing, we try to reach down to lift others up. So slowly reaching down without, again, me throwing my back out. Years ago, I could touch my toes, but I'm convinced my legs have grown longer. So just stretch, and then we slowly bring up others in our communities. And we burned 4 calories in the process. Thank you all. Please be seated. We are fortunate again to have with us today one of my colleagues on the California Transportation Commission, a longtime leader in San Diego, where she served with distinction on the San Diego City Council, then was elected to our state legislature, served as appropriations chair, and has been on the commission now for the past several years. She flew up both days all the way from San Diego. Chris Kehoe. Chris, thank you for joining us. Okay, we have one more opportunity before I have the pleasure of introducing our morning keynote for swag. Major takeaway from yesterday. If you have one, and do we have microphones in the room? Okay, then we're going to these takeaways will only be in this room, and we'll get those microphones for our questions later with our keynote and our moderators. But if you had a major takeaway from yesterday, please stand. Share it. Anyone with a major takeaway from yesterday? Okay, we're going to switch it up. We're going to start slowly this morning as the coffee and caffeine kick in. Chris Kehoe.
It's a simple one. It's a simple one, but yesterday drove home for me completely that biking and active transportation can be a tool for social justice and social change. And that I think struck in all the panels. So that was good for me.
Excellent. Chris Kehoe, you already have a shirt, don't you?
Yeah, I don't need a shirt.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's find out who came the furthest for this conference.
Well, that'd be me again.
Who came the furthest? San Diego. Anyone come further than San Diego? South Carolina. And she rode her bike. Really? Oh, I see. Okay, you're speaking for her on behalf of. Okay, anyone in the room today further than San Diego? please stand. Please put down the hot scalding coffee.
Ready to catch?
Well done with an assist as well. Thank you. Anyone else? Who came the furthest from up north? Chico. A lot of people from Chico, but people from Chico who are closer to me from a distance perspective. Someone from Reading? Well done. Okay. What's that? Eureka. Well, okay, that's further. That's further.
Fine, you win.
Okay, could you stand, please? Could you stand? Yes.
All right, lined up, and the pitch.
Okay, who were the doubters that thought that I wasn't going to be able to throw that accurately? Oh, that hurts. Fantastic. Well, if you look at your watches, you'll see it's 9:14. And what did we learn yesterday? We start on time, we end on time, we respect your time. So it is a great pleasure, and I encourage you to look into your program for background information on our amazing morning keynote, but you would rather hear from her than about her. So please join me in thanking for a conversation on Vision Zero, Safe, Livable, Equitable Communities, Leah Shahum.
Good morning, everybody. I'm going to just back up a little bit. Carl's jumping ahead. He's stealing my slides. Good morning. It's a really honor to be here. My name's Leah Shahum. I'm with a nonprofit group called the Vision Zero Network. And a little bit about us, we'll say first, I live in San Francisco. Been there now 25 years, so a little over half my life. I moved here, or there, I should say, from very suburban Florida. And I moved to San Francisco, and I thought, I'm going to get rid of my car, because I definitely had a car in suburban Florida, and unfortunately drove everywhere, to be honest. I was one of those kids that said, Mom, can I walk to the store 2 blocks away? And they were like, no one walks here. It was this terrible thing. We're like, gosh, don't they? So I moved to San Francisco and thought, wow, I don't need a car. I'm going to walk. I'm going to take transit. I'll be honest, at that time, biking wasn't very familiar to me as a mode of transportation. I just wasn't raised that way. So I got to San Francisco, and frankly, the transit system wasn't exactly what I thought it would be, and I was having trouble getting to my jobs. And I had 2 jobs at the time. I worked at a little magazine. I worked as a waitress, also to actually earn some money. So I started biking, totally out of necessity. Transit was just not dependable enough, frankly, for me at the time to get across town and make my job. So I started biking and thought, and it was one of those things you do just because it's cheap. I can borrow my roommate's bike. Isn't this great? And then all of a sudden, I started feeling this real angst from people. I was literally driven off or chased off the road one time. This is going back 24 years, so it's not so bad anymore. But literally feeling this angst towards me, I think it was the first time I really felt physically threatened by anyone else, and that I really realized, like, wow, what is this about? And got mobilized and started volunteering with the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, which was then only 200 members, tiny. And I was like, wow, shouldn't we be able to walk around, bike around, move around on our streets in the way we want? Ended up working there for like 17 years. I don't know how that happened, but next thing you know, you're there like half your life. But I wanted to let you all know that, I didn't come into this as, I'm not a transportation planner, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a technical person at all. I can barely do like percent change math. That's honestly, people are like, how many more people bike today? And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. It's either 2% or 200% or negative percent. I don't know. But I'm really lucky to be working with a bunch of smart people who do know that stuff. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my background. And so I ran the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition for about 14 of those 17 years. And I'll just share that what really got me into this work then, because some of you may relate, is that in 2014, actually it was 2013, New Year's Eve of 2013 into 2014, we had a particularly high-profile series of traffic deaths in San Francisco, and every death and severe injury is a tragedy, of course, but these got a lot of attention. I think partly it was New Year's Eve, partly we had a high number of deaths in general, particularly among people walking. And there was a little 6-year-old walking with her mother in a crosswalk on a street that we as advocates had worked really hard. I personally had worked on that street for 10 years to try and improve safety, frankly unsuccessfully. And this child died on New Year's Eve holding their mother's hand. A senior citizen also died that night. And it really struck me. I just want to share that unfortunately isn't completely uncommon, but I came into work a few days later, let's say January 3rd or 4th, and I'd been reading about Vision Zero in New York City, and other folks have followed this. New York City was the first US city to commit to Vision Zero, and I'll talk more about that. But I really came into the office on the new year, now it was 2014, really frankly depressed, saying, I've been an advocate for, 17 years now or whatever it was, 14 years at the time. It's not that we're not doing enough. We're not doing the right things or enough effective things, and the city's not doing enough effective things, and our systems are not effective. And I felt really despondent, to be honest. I ran into someone who at the time was running the San Francisco Environment Department. Great guy who bikes everywhere. Actually, he's now running the California Environment Department. Anyways, I ran into him on the street. He was a Bicycle Coalition member, and we both were like, oh, God, we're reading the news. It's so terrible, the tragedies. And he looked at me, and this was like my boom moment. It's funny how these strange times happen. It was lunchtime on, first week of January. He said, it's crazy that we as a city of San Francisco can have a zero waste policy, but we don't have a zero death policy when it comes to our streets and our transportation system. And it just hit me. I literally turned around, went back to my office, called my colleague at Walk San Francisco at the time. I was at the Bike Coalition, she's at Walk San Francisco, and said, we need to do Vision Zero. This is crazy. And I literally said those words. I went back into my staff and I said, so I know y'all did your plans for the year. Well, there's this new thing called Vision Zero. We're going to add that to your plan. They loved that. You love that last minute thing. But to jump ahead, I want to really give credit. Our mayor at the time, Mayor Lee, the police chief at the time, transportation director at the time, they were all really, truly angsting and sad about these tragedies and the situation. And they embraced it. I'll be honest, none of us really knew what we were embracing, but we embraced it. And I've since learned a lot more about Vision Zero, and that's where I'm going to jump in now. Let's see if this. So I left the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition about a year after that and started this nonprofit, the Vision Zero Network, because we were getting so many calls from people saying, how do we do Vision Zero? And let me just pause and say it for folks that may not be aware, that's the goal of zero traffic deaths or severe injuries among all road users. I want to really emphasize that. It's not just a pedestrian initiative, though that sector gets a lot of attention because it should, because it's been underserved and overrepresented in traffic deaths and injuries. But people walking, biking, skateboarding, scooting, driving, transit, everything. Let's see. Shouldn't have to do that, should I? Told you guys I'm not technologically savvy, sorry. It's like, I should escape, thank you. Okay. There we go, great.
I'm out.
Perfect. So, New York was doing Vision Zero. Now San Francisco became a Vision Zero city. Only 2 cities in the US, this is going back 5 years now, 5 years ago. 2 cities in the US had committed to Vision Zero. And I thought, well, that's great. This is not going to be something that's going to sweep America, right? Like, literally, are we going to get politicians and transportation directors and planning directors and health directors to stand up and say we can do zero traffic deaths? I'm a pretty positive or optimistic person, but even I thought that was unlikely. But I was so wrong, and I'm so glad I was wrong. In those first couple months, we started getting calls from, I swear to you, Orlando, Florida, Anchorage, Alaska, Durham, North Carolina, San Diego, a lot of people in California calling and saying, what is Vision Zero? We want to do it. We were getting calls from new mayors who had just come into office, from family members who lost loved ones, from transportation staff, from public health staff. People were really eager to learn more. And I want to give a lot of credit first to New York City for going first. It's always hard to go first on something, but what they did, this is not the only way to do it, but what they did, because you can imagine, I won't ask you to raise your hands because that could be a little bit, but I'll just say, if you'd asked me 5 or 6 years ago, wow, would your elected officials stand up and publicly commit to such an ambitious and bold goal as zero traffic deaths? I would have said, no, they will not. There's no way, right? But they are. Now, that's only a first step, but they are. So I want to give credit. Advocates in New York City, the way they really got this bold goal going is that they inserted this work of Vision Zero, the program of Vision Zero, into the mayor's race. And all the major candidates, this is back in 2013, into 14, all the major candidates endorsed the platform of Vision Zero. Now, that's a step, right? That's important. I just want to advocates, it's really important. But what was more impressive, I think, is that the person that did get elected then followed it through. They came up with a Vision Zero plan that was not perfect by any means, but I'll talk a little bit about what they did within just a couple months, and they've seen dramatic changes. So we've really followed in those footsteps. I'm sad to say when I made this slide presentation like 2 weeks ago, we didn't have the newest numbers. I'm sad to say we have worse numbers that I'll share with you right now. So this was an estimate from a year ago, but new numbers came out from the feds. 2018 had a 2% overall decrease in traffic deaths. Before you celebrate, saw a more than 3% increase in people walking being killed on our streets last year, 2018, and more than a 6% increase in people biking on our streets last year. So again, these are new numbers, not what's here. But overall, that was 36,560 preventable deaths on our streets in the US last year. That is on par, or similar to, I should say, similar to gun deaths in this country, opioid deaths in this country, yet show me where we're seeing even the fraction of public attention, whether that's media or policy attention towards these preventable deaths. And you'll hear me say preventable a lot here. This number did stay the same, unfortunately. This was a projection, now it's true. 2018 did indeed see the largest number of pedestrian fatalities since 1990. It is getting safer to drive in this country. The opposite is happening for those of us walking and biking. So obviously, that's why we're here. I want to pause and say, I try and go through the sad, depressing slides quickly and then get to the positive part, but I just want to pause and say, thank you earnestly, honestly, for the work you do. We could all be doing easier work. We could all be doing more glamorous work. There's not anybody out there like, wow, traffic safety, let me at it. It's the coolest thing ever, right? This is not star-studded stuff. And it is honestly an honor to work with so many people, whether they're in the professional transportation field, advocacy field, public health field, policymaking field, who understand how vital mobility is to all the other pieces of our lives. So thank you for your work. So jumping ahead a little bit, I'm really proud to say that in the last 5 years, 5.5 now, more than 40 communities in the US have committed to Vision Zero. And I want to give a shout out. I know Watsonville is here. I know San Diego's here. Sacramento's obviously here. A lot in California. I won't read them all, but you see a lot in California. So what does that mean that they committed? We give credit, so to speak. We put you on the map when your top elected official, so your mayor, usually a mayor, has officially committed to the goal of zero traffic deaths in a set time frame. And when you've got the minimum agencies on board, obviously transportation or public works, public health, I really want to drive that home. Public health is critical. Police department, and we'll talk a lot more about enforcement, and your policymakers, which again is your mayor or city council, or hopefully both, sometimes a city manager, depending. So that's what we consider kind of the critical partners within Vision Zero at the local level. We also give credit if you've done an action plan. So it's not just, hey, we're going to do it. And I'll talk about this. Vision Zero is not a slogan. I spend probably like 60% of my work time saying Vision Zero is not a slogan. It's not a PR campaign. It's not a tagline. It's not even a program. I get a little discouraged when people use the word program. It is, and we'll talk about it, it is a transformative shift in how we're doing business around transportation. It is not happening completely or fully or perfectly in any of the places doing it. So whatever positive examples I show you, I don't want to pretend they're doing perfectly, but we are starting, I would say, to turn the tide a little bit in how we think about these issues. So this is just kind of a broad summary, real high level of some of the differences. I won't go through all of these, but I want to highlight a couple. This is, first of all, I want to say I'm not criticizing the traditional approach in the sense of, oh, wow, everyone before Vision Zero was messed up. Absolutely not, right? Let me start by saying we all care about safety. The concept of safety is not a new concept. Nobody invented it, years ago. But I would say, looking at various policies and funding programs and plans and decisions made, safety has certainly not always, or perhaps even usually, been our highest priority in making decisions, local, regional, state, federal level, and we can see a lot of examples of that. So thinking about this traditional approach versus Vision Zero, one of the biggest pieces is this first one of, we've thought about traffic deaths as inevitable. Maybe not consciously. You're not walking around going, well, that happens, bummer. Of course not, right? But literally, the federal government and other agencies plan for a certain number of deaths, right? And part of this is changing that mindset. That's not how we think about the opioid crisis. It's not how we think about gun deaths. It's not how we thought, years ago when we thought, let's conquer the AIDS virus, right? This is not how we generally in society approach public health crises, but we are. So there is this implicit, and it's not just America, by the way, it's around the world, but there's this implicit complacency in a way of a cost of modern society, a cost of being mobile and economically effective or successful means that we're going to have a certain number of deaths on our streets. That is not true. That we know how to prevent deaths. Let me pause and say, there will be crashes. People are not perfect, and we'll talk about that, right? People are going to bump into each other, going different speeds, different vehicles. If you can walk away with a fender bender or a broken ankle, okay, we can live with that. This is about preventing deaths and severe injury, and that is possible. So these things are preventable. And a big piece of that is number two, this idea we've traditionally, and again, this isn't super explicit. I don't mean to be wagging a finger of, oh, we've been doing it wrong. But our system traditionally has been grounded on this idea that we can perfect human behavior, teach people to do the right thing, educate them, enforce the laws. Yep, there's a role for those things. But what we actually need to start with is say, we are never going to perfect human behavior. People are fallible. We are going to make mistakes. So again, we're going to have crashes. The system we set up, and that's on policymakers, that's on system designers, that's on community leaders to really push the system we design, the roads we design, the policies we set, the speeds we set. That has everything to do with how people are then going to behave in there. So it's really about looking upstream, and let me jump ahead to that. So first, to run through these, acknowledging that traffic losses are preventable. And if there's one thing I'll ask you, and I'll say I'm really pleased. In day one, I don't think I heard anyone say the A word. And that's not to shame anybody, but 5 years ago, I was certainly using the A word all the time, but I've really been enlightened by other folks of when we call these traffic incidents accidents, it's not about blame for the individual. Leave that aside for who's at fault literally, individually. It's about this idea of accident as if we do not have agency. Things happen, right? A meteor falls out of the sky and 10 people are injured. Who could have known? That's not what traffic crashes are. And when we look at patterns of traffic crashes, we generally know what causes severe crashes. We generally know the areas they're going to be in. We generally know how to fix them. Now, do we have the political will to fix them? It means change, big change. So it's about that. So taking this word accident off the table, I would ask you all to do that in your own work, encourage your coworkers, and it's also a great conversation starter, like with my family. They get so sick of this, by the way. But now I have them correcting other people. It's hysterical. Like my mom will be like, Mary, it's not an accident, it's a crash. And she's telling her, like, oh, okay, my work is done. But it really gets people starting of, oh, did you ever think about that? So it's not just, wow, these terrible things happen out of our control. So again, people, we individually have responsibility, of course, but more importantly, just as importantly, and maybe more importantly, there's control and there's responsibility at upper levels that we need to be putting more attention on. And that brings us to the systems approach to prevention. So I want to ask, how many public health professionals in the room? Public health people, yes, I recognize some of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We need more of you in the room. We need to be collaborating with you more. We need to be co-funding projects with you more. Public health is going to be our way forward, I believe. And by that, I mean taking a more public health-driven approach to traffic safety. And an example of that, people have probably seen, especially in the health world, this little diagram thing. Thanks to Prevention Institute, which is a health group for developing this, they use this for all sorts of things. This is not a traffic thing. This is for everything. But thinking about big, gnarly problems, right? We have spent traditionally a lot of time on these lower rungs, the promoting community education, strengthening individual knowledge, right? Oh, we're going to do a billboard campaign. We're going to do a radio PSA. We're going to educate more kids in school. Okay, keep doing that. I am not discouraging that at all. That is not going to get us where we need to go. Absolutely not. Why? Because the system is not built for the safest, best behavior, and we'll talk about that. So how do we get the system built for that? And I mean physically built, but also kind of policy-wise built. So we need to spend more time at the upper levels, which let me just say is harder. There's a reason we haven't been doing it. It's harder. But we're starting to do it. We're doing it more and more, I should say. I want to give credit. It's been done. But really thinking about influencing policy, legislation, organizational practices. This is where, bringing back to your agency, whether it's Caltrans or a local Department of Transportation or a public health department, thinking upstream about this work. And I'll jump ahead here. This is kind of an oversimplified diagram, but I kind of like it, helps me think about this. The little car icon, so imagine that person either driving, walking, biking, scooting, there's the individual, right? And underneath it says, road users are responsible for following the roads. Absolutely, right? We want people to be responsible, so keep educating, have clear, good laws. We'll talk about that. But sometimes road users are going to fail to comply. Maybe it's intentional, but a lot of times it's unintentional, right? Maybe it's sun in your eyes while you're driving. Maybe it's something worse. You make a bad decision about speeding or drunk driving. People are going to do that. It's going to keep happening, even with technology. Let me just pause and say, AV is not going to get us out of this one because systems break down. And then really, it's this top piece that is kind of the new piece that Vision Zero brings in. And I really say this, by new, I mean really emphasizing it is ultimately the system designers and policymakers' role and responsibility to recognize this and say, we are going to change the system so that when that inevitable mistake or bad decision happens, it's not severe. So again, a crash might happen, but it's not severe. So there's a lot of ways we know how to do that. I know that sounds maybe a little Pollyanna, of like, so again, I'm not trying to fix everybody's behavior, but to say when it happens, the system is going to be forgiving. I think that's a way to think of it. I've kind of learned that people talk about, forgiving environment. And we'll give some examples of that. Oop. Sorry, why do I keep doing this? Wow, I really am just... All right, y'all, which one do I push?
Oh, wait, not for that one.
Oh, great. Slideshow, thank you. Sorry, this looks so different than my computer.
Current slide.
Current slide, thank you. Nope.
Over.
From current. Thank you. Yeah. This is the group participation part. I have to tell you guys my honestly, one of my favorite stories ever of me being a complete technophobe is I was giving a presentation about bike stuff in San Francisco, and I was on stage with David Byrne, the lead of Talking Heads. Who knows David Byrne, Talking Heads? And he's a big bicyclist, so he was talking about biking too. Anyways, he got up and helped me with my slideshow because I was messing up like that. I was like, I literally, in front of hundreds of people, was like, oh my God, thank you, Mr. Byrne. Like the best thing ever. So, you guys were awesome though too. You guys were awesome too. Next, I want to roll into a couple more pieces here. So Vision Zero is data-driven. This is not a new concept either, right? We've always had information and data, and we use that. I would say with technology, we are getting more fine-grained information and data, and we can do that. And we can be more targeted, so to speak, with approaches. So I want to just give a couple examples. You'll see LA, this shows that 65% of the deaths and injuries of people walking are on just 6% of streets. San Francisco, 70%. This crashes means severe and death. So severe crashes are on 12% of streets. In Denver, 50% of the fatals are on 5% of streets. Every single city we work with has some statistic like this. And what I mean by that is there's a really big proportion of problems on a relatively small percentage of streets. And that probably doesn't surprise you, right? And it shouldn't. But it really is helping, I would say, wake people up to where our very limited resources and energy need to go. And I'm going to give a couple more examples. Well, Sacramento, I just want to give a shout out. Sacramento, one of the things folks are doing through the Vision Zero work is really digging into this high injury network. And I'll say, kudos again, you can look at past traffic fatalities and say, okay, here's what's happening over 5 years or 7 years. What we're seeing, I would say the most successful Vision Zero communities do is then team up with their public health departments to say, now how does this, and I apologize, I don't have a map of this, but there's great examples you can see on our website, how does this high injury network, say from one of these cities, overlap with asthma rates, overlap with low income, overlap with communities of color, overlap with folks who don't own a car, et cetera. Surprise, lots and lots of overlap, and I'll jump ahead to that. And thanks to the Safe Routes to School National Partnership for these statistics. These are national stats. Again, you may not be surprised by this, but low-income folks are twice as likely to be killed while walking. African American, Latino Americans, twice as likely to be killed while walking. That is in huge part because those communities have an inverse relationship with safe facilities. You could see similar for bike lanes, for instance. The adverse is true where lots more freeways and high-speed arterials, wide lanes, fast-moving traffic touch down or run through low-income communities, communities of color. We also, of course, know that, there's transit challenges there. So this stuff, and we heard a lot about this yesterday, and I want to say thank you to all the presenters and folks who shared and really, I think, made us think and push on this. What I'm excited about is, these are not new issues, obviously, but it's really exciting to see kind of with this dig into data, I think we're bringing more people into this conversation of how do we change this? And I want to give credit, I don't know if anybody's here from San Francisco, from the city, but give them a little bit of credit and say there's more work to be done for sure, but an example of this, it was referred to in some ways yesterday, before Vision Zero, like many things in politics, transportation budgets, I'm kind of oversimplifying here, but like our local transportation budget was generally split up amongst the supervisoral districts, 11 districts, right? Everybody gets their piece of the pie. That's how things work in politics, geographically, right? Like, okay, boom, boom, boom. Maybe there's a big project here or there every now and then, but generally everybody wants their fair share. Well, let me tell you, when you look at a map of, I'll go back, it's not really a great map, but San Francisco, if folks know the Tenderloin community, that's our lowest income community, community with the most children, lowest car ownership community, most dense. The Tenderloin community is also our highest crash area in San Francisco. Well, it deserved more than 1/11 of the pie to address traffic safety issues. And I'm really, really proud to say, and this, it took 2 or 3 years, but through a lot of work, I'd say particularly from our public health friends, from advocates, from policymakers, we convinced city councilors to do differently. Now the west side, hillier, much more affluent, much lower density, much higher car ownership, has much lower traffic injury and death rates, probably not surprisingly, right? So they, and to their credit, folks on the west side, leaders, political leaders, agreed, yeah, the Tenderloin and south of Market, another busy and high injury area with a lot of traffic and low income populations, they deserve more than their piece of the pie. So the pie is being split up differently. When I say the pie, I'm obviously talking about budgets, budgets of transportation safety improvement. So there's a lot more street improvements happening in the Tenderloin than 1/11 of the pie now, which is the way we need to be moving, which is the way that this data can really help. And as people were saying yesterday, really talk about what are the inequities of the past and how do we address those? How do we help bring not just kind of a fair share, but make up for what has been disinvestment and underinvestment over all these years? And here's an example of, again, where high injury networks for cities are overlapping with other vulnerabilities. You can really see a lot more on the website, though, around this. So I want to move into kind of the how do we address this? And not all E's are created equal. Does everybody know what the E's are, right? You've got the enforcement, education, engineering, emergency services, evaluation. I think those are maybe the traditional E's. More and more of us are trying to get equity and engagement in there as E's. So I don't want to knock the E's, because I know, there's been a lot built on the E's in American society, but I want to pause and say, not all E's are created equal. And I do want to clarify something that yesterday was said, that Vision Zero touts the E's, and it doesn't. I want to be really clear that the concept of Vision Zero is literally, it was a European concept in the beginning, and it didn't have the E's at all. The E's are an American construct that's been going for a long, long time, and we're saying we need to de-silo these E's. Again, not to say there's not a role for everybody, but this idea that all the E's are created equal and that they're all going to have equal impact and that they're all appropriate to be used all the time is not appropriate. So really thinking about how do we unpack that and think about what's our goal? Our goal is safe travel for all. What are the different ways to do that? And this is, again, really simplified, but think, there's people, there's behavior, there's the vehicles, the technology, and all that stuff that other people are working on. There's the environment itself, there's speeds, and people fit different categories fit into these, right? There's engineers and planners that fit into different areas. Law enforcement fits in different areas. Policymakers fit in different areas. So thinking about kind of the traditional role of the E's, breaking that down a bit and thinking, okay, what is our goal and how are we working together? And I want to say it's one of the things I'm really excited about with Vision Zero is that we are seeing more collaboration across the silos. So it's not just, hey, that's a transportation problem. Hey, that's an enforcement problem. Send it over there. What we're seeing, and again, I'm holding up San Francisco just because I know probably the most about it, its Vision Zero Task Force is co-led by the Transportation Agency and the Public Health Agency. And that's the way it should be, right? It's not just a transportation issue. But what they do at their monthly regular task force meetings, they have regular reports on all the traffic deaths that have happened in that month. And the police are there to talk about them. And public health is there to talk about that, how that overlaps with other public health issues in the city. And transportation's there to talk about it. And they can really collaborate on, hey, you know what, maybe this isn't an enforcement issue. Maybe we don't need to just throw more cops at this corner. Maybe this corner is inherently built badly and we need to improve upon it. And I'll talk about that. So yes, really thinking about how do we emphasize the most important E's, which are engineering or road design, and the policies behind that. So those are really roadway redesign and managing speed. This is just a before and after shot of a street in New York City. I'm going to pick on my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida for a second. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, like I said, suburban Florida. This is right outside my parents' house. These kids are walking to school. There's a school about 2 blocks away. They're like upper grammar school, probably 5th or 6th grade if I had to guess. They're walking to school. Awesome. Active transportation, they're doing it. These kids don't have a sidewalk. And even though the street looks small, people drive really fast down it. I know that for a fact. So my stepdad used to call the city councilor all the time. We need sidewalks. We need sidewalks. Not for like the kids. He wanted sidewalks for the kids. Never got them, by the way, or not yet, I should say. But this is not an education problem. This is not an enforcement problem. Any state, I love Safe Routes to School, but if Safe Routes is just focused on, say, education or enforcement, that is not going to help here, right? These kids they're not given a good, safe option. But they're still walking to school, which is great. But this isn't engineering. This is a design issue. So I'm not going to go too much of that, but really thinking about how are we bringing folks like police and public health in to help the designers, planners, engineers really do what they need to do, which is build complete streets, and which is slow down speeds. So talk a little bit about safety over speed. This is another piece I think is really being elevated through the Vision Zero work is we know, bottom line, and I'll say this straight up, if you are not managing speed for safety, you're not going to get anywhere near Vision Zero. You're not going to make a dent. You've got to touch this one. This one's big. Just an example of some ways to do that, but let me jump into, this is like my favorite if I could show one slide, it would be this one. Bottom line, it's a math problem. Again, math's not my strong suit, but an average individual, and let me say, this is an average, healthy individual, full-size, active individual. Hit at 20 miles per hour, you have a 10% chance of dying. Same person hit at 40 miles per hour, 10% chance of survival. So this is even more extreme for seniors who may be frail, people with disabilities, children who are all overrepresented, we know, in traffic deaths in this country. This is controllable. This is manageable. Now, am I saying go do this on the freeways? Yeah, this is not what's going to happen on I-80, no, right? But people are in cars on I-80. They're in their giant SUVs, et cetera, and when they hit each other, they've got a lot protecting them. You guys know this, but in Sacramento, walking around the streets to get here today, in West Sacramento, in all of our communities, we should not be encouraging, allowing, setting, designing speeds for 40 miles per hour, or even 35, or even 30. We should be, and places are doing this. I want to give a shout out Cambridge, Massachusetts, in all their squares, which is kind of their downtown, most busy areas, near transit and walkable, bikeable, et cetera, going 20 miles per hour citywide in Cambridge. Cities like Boston, New York City have lowered from 30 to 25 citywide. I know a lot of us have 25 kind of de facto, but in a lot of places, and especially in more suburban, especially in more rural, they're much higher than that, right? So even this issue of, how are we setting speed? What are we doing around managing that speed? I just want to give a shout out. California right now is embarking on a project to look at how speeds are set and the wisdom of using, basically, I won't get into this too much because it's so wonky, but we're setting our speed limits right now based on something that was literally created like 50, 60 years ago in rural America when the conditions were wildly different. Literally, the test they did was all men driving. I always found that interesting. It was all men driving, literally 50 years ago in rural areas. That is how the entire country, well, especially California, sets its speed limits. I'm oversimplifying, but we're looking at that, and we're really hoping that California does update its policies, its standards, its recommendations to address that. But in the meantime, and we don't want to wait too much for that, I want to give some credit to communities that are doing now everything they can do with what they've got. So Fremont, California, and you guys know Fremont's not like the most built out urban place, right? It's more suburban in scope and shape. It's mid-size. They've lowered speed limits where they can, but they can't go much lower. They can't use automated speed enforcement because of state rules, but they can redesign roads for lower speeds. So this used to be a 2-lane travel road here on one side, 2 and 2, and with simple paint, they turned the parking. They added a bulb out here. They created a buffered bike lane, and they have lowered speeds. They've measured this, and people driving are driving slower. And they did this yeah, the bike lane is great, but they did this mainly because there was an issue with seniors walking being hit in this area. It was a heavy senior area. So now people are driving more slowly, and seniors have fewer lanes to, and everyone has fewer lanes to cross, and it's a safer street. So this is a project with paint, right? These are the kinds of things that the roadway design is where we should start. And really thinking about how our roads are designed for the speeds we want for safety. Another credit to Portland, Oregon. They're doing a really good job. That speed setting discussion I just mentioned, they've done this where the city of Portland's gone to their state and gotten approval to do a pilot to set speeds, not based on how fast all the other cars are going, which is basically how we do it, but rather on what's called a safe systems approach. The idea of what is this road built for? What's the land use? What's the context? What is the usage, people walking and biking? What's the crash history and injury history on the street? Portland's doing this right now, and it's really a big deal. They're only about a year or maybe 2 years and a half into it. There's a case study on our website. Check it out. We're really eager to see data back from this. And I think everyone around the nation's kind of watching this to say this should be our new standard. We should have a safe system standards that recognizes land use and people walking and biking versus this old standard that we use. So great that Portland's doing that. I mentioned New York City. They citywide lowered from 30 to 25. You see that here, and they started with an automated speed enforcement camera that's around schools specifically that's been tremendously successful. Let me say Portland, Seattle have also started new automated speed enforcement programs. I just want to get back for a second to say, camera programs are not the perfect panacea, but when run well and thoughtfully and carefully and with an eye towards how are we making them equitable for low-income people, they can be far more appropriate, especially when we think about concerns about police enforcement and real worries about racial bias in enforcement. So the cameras cannot, cameras are kind of colorblind, right? So where they're placed obviously is important, how they run is important, but we see that as a really important tool down the road. And credit to San Francisco and San Jose, who've been working hard here in Sacramento to try and get allowance to test cameras. Just pilot them on the high-speed areas. And I want to give a shout out too, Vision Zero was started in Sweden and has definitely taken hold faster there, but it's really exciting to see other places beyond America too really embrace it. Mexico City, they had a mayor that really went for the last 4 years or so strong on Mexico City, or on Vision Zero, where they lowered speed limits on streets like this, redesigned speed limits, used automated speed enforcement, built out, definitely not fully, it's a big city, but grew their bike network, et cetera. They saw in their first couple, I think it was first 3 or 4 years, a 17% decrease in traffic fatalities, which is really impressive, and specifically on the areas where they had the cameras, notably lower. I don't have a picture, but I want to give credit to Bogota, Colombia, where they've also, I know we've got a Colombian in the room. Bogota, Colombia is another major city in South America that's embraced Vision Zero just in the last couple years. And I think they've been building out their bike network even more, et cetera. But the piece that I'm most impressed with is around their speed management. They lowered a series of major arterials. And I know that's hard, right, to think about the arterials, right? That's the tough piece. They lowered major arterials down to the equivalent of 29 miles per hour. It was higher than that. 29 miles per hour. On those arterials, they saw a 27% decrease in fatalities. Citywide, over 1 year, so that was on those streets. Citywide, they saw an 11% decrease in fatalities. From the 4 years prior, they saw a 12% decrease in fatalities. A big, messy, gnarly city, right? And I say this because sometimes like, New York City is doing it, but that's not us. Absolutely. But it's all scalable, right? Most of us don't have that many streets to deal with or that many miles to deal with. So how do we scale the same or similar strategies down to a smaller area? And I want to pause and just say one way we don't want to do that, and where Vision Zero does not encourage, is over-enforcing. So back to those all E's are not created equal. Safe systems means build the systems we want to encourage good behavior. So build sidewalks, bikeways, streets, crossing times, where people can do the safe thing, right? Where the speeds are safe. And then enforcement is your very last measure. So nowhere in the world of vision, I shouldn't say, now the concern is, are people taking this and lopping Vision Zero onto the traditional E's? Absolutely, that's possible. So I would say as advocates, as community members and public sector folks working on this, we need to make sure people understand Vision Zero is not about throw more police at the problem or throw more enforcement at the problem. That is old school. That is the traditional way of doing it, right? This is about really transitioning to say, we know where the problems are, fix those problems in a systemic way. And what this is going to take is leadership. And just to wind it down, I'll run through real quickly, but you can't read this, I know, but I thought just an example, one thing I think that's happening is there's much more transparency and accountability around what we're doing in the world of safety and mobility now in these, I'd say in the strong Vision Zero communities. And I threw Denver up here. Again, you can't read the specifics, but there's 10 pages of actions that are very explicit. Here's an action. Here's what it's going to cost. It's a short-term, medium-term, or long-term. Or I guess they're just doing short and medium-term, and then here's the partners. This is really important because you can now go quarterly to your city council, or maybe it's annually to your police commission, like we do in San Francisco, and talk about what's being done, right? Is there a concern about racial profiling in the citations being given? Are we directing the traffic safety engineering dollars to the communities that need them most, and not just kind of painting it evenly across the city? When you have this kind of detailed action plans that's transparent to the public, that they must come back and account on or report on, you have accountability. And I want to get back to, I mentioned that the New York City mayor's race, this is critical, and especially for the advocates in the room. If we do not hold our public leaders accountable for their commitments, obviously none of this is going to work. It's like anything, right? But how are we making sure that we're measuring what they and the folks they appoint to departments are doing? And I want to give credit, this is LA a couple years ago, but awesome LA team. When people said, LA's doing Vision Zero, oh my gosh, that's crazy. They're the Car Central kind of area. Like, no, every community, again, Mexico City, New York City, Bogota, big, crowded, dense, messy cities can make these changes. And it really is, it's not about changing our technical tools so much. We know what the toolbox, the toolbox can always be improved. Let me say, I know with technology and smart people, the toolbox is going to get better and better, but we generally know what works. Lowering speeds works. Redesigning streets so that they are moving at a speed where people don't get killed. That is knowable. That is the math problem, right? We know that. It's a political equation that we're not solving for appropriately right now. It is a matter of, do we have the political will to say we're prioritizing safety over speed, safe mobility over speed? I just want to pause or end it by saying, it can be depressing to say the zero deaths. Really what Vision Zero is about is more. And again, I want to give credit, this is from the LA Bike Coalition a couple years ago, but when we are successful, the work you're doing at the commission, at your local DOT, at your public health department, at your advocacy group, the work you're doing is about more, right? Helping people have more time with their families, more birthdays, more celebrations, more life. So I want to say thank you for the work you're doing, and let's think, how do we turn this from, yes, we need to predict and be proactive and prevent these tragedies from happening, but really what we need to be doing is building the kinds of communities that are safe for everybody getting around, right? It's a really positive thing to say, hey, we are all building those communities. And the biggest way we can do that is honestly building the political leadership, making sure that our electeds understand and commit to this and that they're held accountable. Thanks so much. Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, and we'd love to take questions if folks want to. I know some questions came up yesterday. We'd love to hear from more folks.
If I may, and this is a great opportunity, again, for Slido, for those who are participating remotely, and our staff colleagues can help monitor Slido, I understand? And as we are preparing for that to happen, do we have our roving mics today?
Yeah, she's
We do, so that if you would like to ask a question to Leah, please stand. I love the comment yesterday, so let's try to get to as many questions as we can. So please stand and stay standing so that our mics can get to you and we can be efficient with our time and not have gaps between questions. And again, I'm sure Leah will benefit if you give your first name, your organization, and make that connection.
Hi, Leah. John Cordes, Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition based in San Jose. One thing I don't see in the Vision Zero scope yet that I think is missing on the engineering side is cars have automated braking systems now, and it's been 50 years since we required seatbelts in cars. Why aren't we doing a massive push to require automatic braking systems in cars going forward? Because that to me seems to be like a great way to protect pedestrians and cyclists by just requiring the car to stop by itself without relying on the driver.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I'll say the technology piece and the automation piece and all the pieces before that is not something our organization has spent a lot of time on, and honestly doesn't have a huge capacity for. I'll just be honest with you. I think there's a lot of people working on that, and maybe we should think about how we can get our coalitions pushing for that. It's funny because you're definitely talking about something that could be done today and should be done today and is being done in places like Europe. And then there's this farther out issue of automation. It's going to be safe when everything's automated. And I'll say it's challenging or frustrating to see, and you're not doing this at all, but in a lot of conversations, especially at the national level, people keep saying, just wait. When the automation comes, everything's going to be safe. And really punting on the designing streets for safety now and managing speeds now, and even addressing the technological capacities that could happen and should happen now. I honestly don't, for the Silicon Valley people in the room, especially, we'd love your help. It's a huge world we've not, even gotten close to cracking. I'll just be honest with you. But it's a concern that bright, dazzling, shiny thing of automation is our savior. I don't know. I'm skeptical, to be honest, but in the meantime, it is drawing energy or oxygen out of the room for the things we need to do now, which is worrisome. So really what we've been messaging on is double down on what works now. We don't have time. 36,000 traffic deaths a year. We don't have time to wait for that far off solution or whenever it is. But I agree with you. Hey, Walt.
Hi, Leah. Walt Seifert with Sacramento TrailNet. So, in your view, which city or country has been most successful in implementing Vision Zero?
Yeah, great question. I'll stick with the U.S. I'll point out maybe, again, nobody's doing it perfectly, or else you would, see real results of zero traffic deaths, but it's going to take a while. I'll say some pieces I'm really impressed with. Portland, Oregon. It does a lot right, you probably know that, but that approach to speed where they're really saying, okay, we're not just going to do this piecemeal approach of lowering speeds on high injury roads. That's the way most of us are doing it, and that's okay, it's a start, right? Let's go lower the speeds on high injury roads. What Portland is doing and being proactive about is saying, we're going to take a systematic approach. We're going to lower all the speeds on these streets, these kinds of streets, so arterials, residential, this and this, lower than we were able to before because they're getting the approval from the state. And so they're going through like a pretty painful, I would say, process to get the state approval and doing it system-wide, which I think is going to have a lot more impact than us. Kind of, by us, I mean most of us doing this whack-a-mole thing where it's like, okay, where's a hot spot? So those maps we showed with the red dots, that's where traffic deaths are. Let's go fix those intersections. I mean, or those corridors, right? We have to do that. Yes, there is some amount of reactivity you need to do. But here's another example. I'd say Seattle and New York City are both doing a really good job of being more proactive and predictive. And I'll give a New York City example of this. Probably not surprising to you. A lot of cities see when they analyze their high injury network, they're like, okay, two things come out of that mainly, right? Well, a lot of things, but where are the biggest problems or what locations are most problematic? And then what behaviors are most problematic? So what behaviors are most problematic, speeding is always often high up there. Left turns are often there, right? So a driver taking a left turn. So New York City did a really good job of going deep into this. I would say everyone steal this idea. Again, there's a case study on our website. Go do this. If this is an issue, what they saw was, a certain kind of road, X kind of arterial with like 4 lanes or more or something. I might be getting that a little wrong, but the cars turning left, there was a disproportionate problem of those drivers hitting people walking in the crosswalks. So not a surprise, right? The left turn, they're watching for cars coming to, visibility maybe isn't as good at all. So they said, hey, instead of going and fixing the, 32 locations where someone's been injured or killed there, yes, we will do that. But we're going to systematically go change all the streets that have this, all the intersections that have this design or design like this. And what they did, different approaches in different locations. Some places they blocked the left turn, like it was so bad or so problematic that they said this is no longer a left turns are illegal. Or maybe they added a light phase, so it was left turning vehicles when people walking could not go, and they phased it. Or maybe it was removing a travel lane so that there was now a pocket lane. Things that engineers understand better than me, but they're now doing that. They're about halfway through all their left turn. Now it's going to take a while. Seattle's doing something similar, but to really look into, okay, what are and speed is a similar one. Again, if this is one of our highest problems, how do we do this community-wide? So I think they're doing a great job. I'll give a shout out to Denver, Colorado. They're working really hard with the state to change speed limits on high injury streets. And I realize looking around that we're in a room with lots of state people. Really think this relationship between the locals and the state in every state is a challenge to the goals of zero. Whether that's inflexibility to set speed limits or to use technology that works like automated speed enforcement, or frankly, delays on data and disconnects on data to different law enforcement priorities and such. What we're seeing is that we're all saying the same thing and we want the same thing, absolutely, right? I mean, no one in this room or anyone we work with, I would imagine, would disagree with zero. Now, the how we get there is very different. I mean, state highway safety plans, more than 40 of them in the country, more than 40 states have some zero language towards zero deaths or something in their state highway safety plan. But dig into that, and none of them will show actual measurable goals with years and timeline and how we're getting down, et cetera, what it will take cost-wise, who owns that. It's a very different, I know obviously states are much bigger, most of them, and more difficult to work on than, say, a city. But we're seeing a really big disconnect with what the cities are asking for and what the data is showing they need to improve safety and what state policies and regulations and systems kind of allow. So I think there's some places like Austin, Texas, that's pushing on that, which is really tough in Texas. Austin's pushing on it, Denver's pushing on it, New York City's pushing on it. Some places in Florida are pushing on it, where they're really going to their state and saying, we need you to change this, this, or this. And let me say, we're doing that in California too. Slowly, very slowly, but.
We actually have a lot
sorry.
of questions on Slido. If you
Right,
want to weave
sure.
those in as well, read the question and then your response.
Sure, I'll be real quick. Have you ever heard of adoption of Vision Zero at the county level? Yeah, LA County is developing a Vision Zero plan, which is great. There's a county in Florida, Hillsborough County. The county that is Portland, Oregon is doing one. So yes, it can be done at the county level. It's a really new area. Again, there's a case study on our website that it's more about MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, doing Vision Zero. You can think a lot about policy and funding priorities. So I want to give a shout out, like SFMTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, our MPO in the Bay Area, now does have safety as a funding criteria or credit. It didn't before in this funding, its funding, which is shocking to me. Great, and the question that someone here asked too, maybe similar, how can we get auto manufacturers to include better safety design? For example, pickup trucks, front ends, get bigger. Yeah, this one we haven't taken on. I mean, the idea of like, wow, how do we take on the auto industry? People who want to work on that, come find me afterwards. It's a whole new world. But it's crazy. I don't know if people have read the studies that have come out from a group called the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. Really smart group. I'm not going to be able to rattle the numbers off, but the data is alarming for how much more dangerous SUVs are than, say again, twice as much, twice as many deaths for SUVs. And I mean, you look at them, it's again, it's physics. Why are we as a society allowing this? Somebody went like this, yep. So I will say that is higher than my pay grade right now, but we need to work on that. Can you please elaborate on the changes the state's investigating on changing the standard for setting speeds from the 85th percentile? Yeah, and that was this task force that I know some other folks in this room are members of. And I really want to thank CalSTA and Caltrans for bringing this together. Let me jump ahead and say, in January, this task force will be bringing, we hope, a set of recommendations to the state legislature. So you'll be hearing a lot more about that. What those are, I don't know yet, but what we've been working on over the last 6 months or so is really looking at how to, I would call it, these are my words, modernize the way we set speeds. Because as I was saying, it's done in such a way that is really outdated. And just to give that a little more context, the federal agency called the National Transportation Safety Board, they're an independent agency. They are separate from like the US DOT or anything, they're separate. They're the ones, you probably heard of them, they do like investigations when there's a train crash or a plane crash. They've been paying more attention to auto safety or like, roadway, I should say roadway safety, which is impressive. So they did a report about 2 years ago on speed, and they basically called out that speed is a factor in about a third of traffic deaths. And that's as many as, it's about the same number as drunk driving, impaired driving. Yet speeding and speed management doesn't get anywhere near the resources from the feds, anywhere near the attention in policy and such. So, long way of saying, they did this whole study saying, hey, and they recommended the states, hey states, you should, and they literally, again, my words, not theirs, they say it more eloquently, you should update this 85th percentile. They literally say it's not working. Go read this report, it's awesome. It's also on our website, but it's not working, it's outdated, it needs to be modernized. So kudos to California for taking that on. It's gonna be a big step though. I mean, there's a lot of thinking of like, oh, we can't move to something new because we've always done this. So it's going to be a big, big change. But I'd say that's the biggest piece. The group is also looking at the usage of automated speed enforcement, perhaps more flexibility in design. But I'd say the biggest one is around the speed setting piece. What statewide policy or statutory changes would be most helpful in supporting the Vision Zero objectives? Oh, good, you guys can see this. The speed management piece, for sure. If there's one thing we could do, it would be being able to lower speeds, particularly in city centers. It's the exact places this ATP, not all, but ATP money is going to places where we know, hey, this is walkable or bikeable, or it's about to be more walkable, bikeable. Let's encourage more people to walk, bike, and take transit. If these speeds are set at 30, 35 miles per hour, we are asking for trouble. We know there's trouble. And I'm not saying don't do the improvements, but at the same time, a part of our Complete Streets work needs to be bringing speeds to an appropriate level. Again, it's just a math problem. People will crash there. And if we change those speed limits and we design the roads for 20 or 25, if we do that, it will be fender benders and broken ankles and not death. So that is the biggest thing we can do. How do we ensure Vision Zero does not become another systemic racism policy or movement? Great question, and I feel like this was referred to yesterday. I want to say, first of all, anything could be taken anywhere, right? So, are there people in some communities who do not understand kind of the system's approach to Vision Zero and could use it whatever way they wanted? Sure. And you could do that with anything. I just want to say that's not an excuse. It's just, no one owns Vision Zero in every community. Everyone's doing it kind of their own way. What we're trying to really emphasize is, look, we've been traditionally overemphasizing education and enforcement. Doesn't mean there's not a role for them at the table, but they need to be appropriate. And those roles have been oversized traditionally. We need to be putting more energy, more policy, more attention, more resources into the roadway design, right? We can't be out there ticketing folks for jaywalking when there's not a good option. So that's a huge piece of it. And I would say, a big piece we're really interested in is how do we help bring transportation safety, the traditional mobility folks, whether they're walking, biking advocates, and this is happening, and both I'd say with public sector and advocate side, community advocate side, into the work around social justice and racial justice for this issue. And we are, and I'll go back to that Tenderloin San Francisco example. You see our walking and biking groups spending a lot more time in the Tenderloin than they ever have before, and teaming up with community groups in Chinatown and Bayview Hunters Point, more traditionally low-income, underserved communities of color. And you really are seeing, okay, this is not just we call the squeaky wheel. It's not just the squeaky wheel or the loudest advocates getting the attention. It really is looking at the data and saying, these communities have been underserved. There are more problems here. Let's put more energy and resources in community engagement there. I'd say the biggest concern and piece we have with this is certainly the enforcement side, right? We suggest in people's Vision Zero work that they literally write in, when I showed you that Denver example, like the strategies and measurables, and we literally are working with folks on this, require that if they have a police commission, not everybody does, so city council, that hopefully oversee the police in some form or fashion, that there be quarterly updates to them of data showing where the citations, traffic citations and stops are going, what neighborhoods. We now know we can check race there. So to be able to track this and have it be part of your Vision Zero work, we need that, and I see Vision Zero, if done well, can be a vehicle, so to speak, or a way to actually help bring more accountability and transparency to what have been for a long time, massive systemic problems. And again, it's thinking, okay, do we not do traffic enforcement because there's the concern of racial bias? I would say no, but let's do it differently. Certainly do it less. Let's have it be the last choice or last option, but we need to be doing it differently. So and it's exciting to see transportation planners and engineers and public health people in the conversation talking about restorative justice, talking about, and I think there's a question here about pricing tickets or citations to be income-based fees and such. So how are we as people who, maybe we didn't enter this work with a social justice lens, we entered it with a planner or mobility or health lens, which is great, or an advocacy lens in some other way, livability, environment, but how are we working on the issues that are based to this and so many other things to really use this as a vehicle to improve, I would say. And again, I don't mean to be Pollyanna, there's gonna be places where, frankly, you have police officers who do things badly. It's going to happen, right? It was happening before Vision Zero. It's going to happen after Vision Zero. How can we use this, though, I would say, to shine more light on that and really have more people watching that and holding police and others accountable? Yeah.
Hey. This is- I bet you do. Hi, this is Sarah. I'm with Safe Routes Partnership. One of the things that I've seen as people use Vision Zero in communities is that it does naturally, as you talked about a lot, really focus on the high injury network. And I sometimes hear that to the sort of taking up space and focusing attention away from mode shift and away from putting resources into low stress networks. So to me, I think one of the biggest ways that we can reduce injuries and deaths is getting people out of cars into modes that are just inherently less likely to cause massive injury to people. So can you just talk about how you think about really prioritizing mode shift and how you think about making sure that we're not just putting resources into arterials, but also thinking about creating low stress networks that everybody really feels safe using on foot or on bike or on whatever mode they're using?
Great point, Sarah. Thanks for bringing it up. And I think in the early years of Vision Zero, I know I'll be honest, and I think others were too, maybe not totally consciously, but especially coming from a bike advocacy background, I'll be honest, I think I was staying away a little bit from the mode change piece in the beginning. And not saying not that it wasn't on my mind, right? But being a little stealth about it. It's kind of like, okay, Vision Zero, safety for everyone, right? Big tent. And in the sense of really being able to now say, okay, we want drivers to be safe too. Well, again, pedestrian and bike advocates always wanted that too, right? We didn't want anyone to be unsafe. But leading with this message of safety for all was a way to kind of bring everyone into the tent. I think, certainly 2 years in or so, okay, there's some there. This has legs, right? This isn't getting pushed out of the out of the room. And we are bringing more people into the conversation around these communities that have been generally underserved, like people walking, biking, seniors, kids, et cetera. And we're having this conversation. So I feel like we're starting to shift more to say, okay, and mode change, or, let me say more specifically, reducing vehicle miles traveled is the biggest way we can advance safety, right? So yes, Vision Zero didn't lead with that out of the gate, and I'll be honest, partly my thinking too was a little, cautious on that, but I think we're seeing that happen now. I know San Francisco, in their new update, check out Really Good Vision Zero Action Plan, it's really front and center of maybe 4 or 5 major themes. It's very explicitly saying reduce vehicle miles traveled. That is part of our part of environmental, part of livability, et cetera, affordability, but it's specifically part of our safety work too. And we're seeing that more and more in New York City, where New York City is advancing, they're moving forward with the congestion pricing. They just did their major transit-only lane, and San Francisco's doing a major transit-only lane, where they're tying this work also to Vision Zero, which is smart, right? And it's not how it started, it's true, but I think the more we can and should do that, the more we're integrating those issues. It's absolutely right. And real quick on the HIN issue, I did emphasize data a lot, and I apologize. I left a big piece out there of the community engagement to balance that data, not supplement. I would say supplement the data. The data, of course, does not tell the whole story, right? A lot of what the data doesn't show you is where are people not walking or biking or moving at all because they're terrified, right? Like walking under some underpass or overpass where no one's getting hit there because no one's going there. But it turns out there's a school a block away. Or if we made this connection, it would actually connect, a decent bike route for kids. Those areas are not coming up on these high injury networks. Good in a way, but bad, right? So, a lot of people talked yesterday about the community engagement side. What we're seeing is you really need to complement what the data shows with what are other priorities. So it may be, and I would say it should be, areas around schools, areas around senior centers, areas around transit, busy transit areas. Really thinking about the whole community as a whole, and also those areas that have really been underserved and aren't even showing up on your map.
Will you join me in thanking Leah?
Thanks so much.
There were obviously more questions in the room, a lot more questions on Slido as well. We'll get to, as a staff level, responding to as many of the Slido questions as we can. And grab Leah during the break, which you are now on. We'll see you in 14 minutes.